Welcome, everybody, to the Right Path podcast, where being an author, an actual author, still matters. Folks, this is the podcast. It's for authors, it's about authors, it's done by an author, where we share our journeys, we explore our creativity, and more importantly, we get to the why behind it all. Now, our guest today has an incredible story as far as that why behind it all that I cannot wait for you folks to hear. Please welcome to the show the author of her upcoming fiction book, Fission, a novel of atomic heartbreak. Please welcome Leslie Schover. Leslie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great and so happy to be here with you.
Thank you so much. I am happy to have you here too. Now, you've got a great story behind this book. We have a ton we can talk about. Even the subject matter of it just sort of thrilled me a little bit based on my own history. And but before we do that, tell everybody a little bit about who Leslie Shover is. You've got a past. You have kind of established yourself in this business in a different way with some nonfiction stuff. Tell us a little bit about what led you here today.
Well, I actually am a clinical psychologist, although I just retired my license. But I spent a lot of my career at the Cleveland Clinic and MD Anderson Cancer Center. And I was kind of a pioneer in helping cancer patients and people with other chronic illnesses with problems with their sex lives and fertility. So I was super specialized.
Wow. Okay. Gosh, I don't think I've ever even heard of that as a discipline. So was that a new sort of groundbreaking thing that you were pioneering? Is that how that worked?
I was probably one of the first few people who were writing and doing research and seeing patients, and now it's a lot more accepted as part of medicine. So that's something I'm proud of that I was in it at the start and helped to get the field going.
Sure. How'd you get into that particular course of study?
Well, I got my PhD in psychology at UCLA, and as part of our training, they had a seminar in how to do sex therapy, and it was pretty soon after Masters and Johnson published their books. So everything was pretty rigid about, using the Masters and Johnson method, et cetera. But it piqued my interest because it seemed like things always seem like when you're young, something where you could take a technique that was short term and really give people a boost on a part of their lives that was so important to their relationships. Of course, I found out that it's a lot more complicated than that, but but after I got my PhD, I did a special postdoctoral fellowship for not quite 2 years with one of the people who was working intensively in the field at that time. And I took my first job in Houston, and I wasn't very happy where I was. And someone from MD Anderson Cancer Center was looking for someone to help them with the sex lives of urology cancer patients like bladder cancer and prostate cancer,
Oh, wow.
and they were told about me and recruited me. So it wasn't something personal back then, like a lot of people who work in cancer have had a parent with cancer or something like that. It was more that my training fit.
Wow. That's just not something that people think about, I don't think. And it seems like the type of thing, if you take it just on its, the topic, it's easy to almost make light of it. But if you know someone who has been through any of those types of things, I personally know a lot of people, unfortunately, who have dealt with those sort of things. And one of the things when you're trying to heal cancer is, you need that closeness. Is going to, if you can have that sort of relationship, if you can have that security, if you can have that emotional connection with somebody, that's just going to help you internally, emotionally and physically to try and heal. I mean, isn't that right?
Oh, absolutely. And these are very common problems. Breast and prostate and GYN cancers
Yeah.
are some of the most common cancers in the United States. And unfortunately, the treatments, more than the cancers themselves, are pretty destructive. And also, we have this horrible trend now that a lot more younger people are getting things like colon cancer and breast cancer. And so in those years, their fertility can also be affected. So it's a big problem. It's not a small one or an unusual one, sadly.
Yeah, my goodness. Well, bless your heart for, working on that and helping people with those types of things. Sounds like it was incredibly needed, especially back when you started doing it.
That's still needed now.
Yeah,
People don't always get the
for
resources they
sure.
need.
For sure. Okay, now, while you were doing that, you got into writing and you wrote, I believe, 4 digital type books previous to writing your upcoming novel.
I actually published 4 books, 3 self-help books, and a textbook with
Aha.
traditional publishers, where I actually had an agent and everything, although I sold the books myself and my agent mainly just negotiated the contracts. It was easy back then. We're talking about, mainly the 1980s when publishing was very different than it is now. So I had a rude awakening when I started writing fiction.
Oh my goodness. So you were with a traditional publisher and everything with your first
Oh,
few.
yeah.
Okay. Goodness. All right. And that was self-help books that you started writing it with. So now the new book is fictional, and this is sort of your premiere, um, release of this fictional novel that you've written. It's called Fission, a novel of atomic heartbreak. Right now, as far as I know, it's due to come out on the 27th of January in 2026.
That's right.
Okay. All right.
With She Writes Press, which is a hybrid publisher. It's pretty selective and publishes a lot of really good books.
Gotcha. Okay. Um, that's wonderful. So, all right, tell us what got you into that. What made you take that switch from the self-help and the nonfiction and come over here to writing a purely fictional novel?
Well, I always loved fiction writing. And when I was in college, I took a lot of creative writing courses. But then during my busy career, I really didn't have a lot of time to write strictly fictional work. I hope a lot of my nonfiction was not fiction. So So when I gradually retired, I retired from my academic career, and then I had my own digital health startup for about 5 years, and that closed during the pandemic. And I had a lot more time on my hands, and I thought, wow, now I have time to really do that stuff I've been wanting to do for so long. And I started taking some writing workshops and, you know, getting to know other writers. And this story was actually the second novel I tackled, but it's the first one I've published. And it came out of the fact that my parents married very young at age 19 and 22, just before Pearl Harbor. And my mother immediately got pregnant by accident. And so they had a kind of a sickly, premature baby on their hands. And when my sister was a little bit more than a year old, my dad was recruited in Chicago to work in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, the secret city where a lot of the Manhattan Project took place. And he didn't have a lot of formal education. He only had a year of technical school, but he was kind of a self-taught electronics whiz. And the group that he worked with was a chemistry group, and one of their tasks was to create the first gram of plutonium. And they worked with a lot of other radioactive isotopes, and they needed equipment to measure that stuff. So that's where my dad came in.
Wow.
And my parents had many funny and interesting stories about their years in Oak Ridge, and I'd always wanted to do something with them. And of course, by that time, both of them were long dead. My father lived longer, and he died in 2007. So we're talking about just about 3 years ago when I started this. And so I had to do a lot of research to flesh out those kind of skeletal stories that I knew. And one of the things I started to do was I looked online for the chemist that was his group leader. And one of the reasons I thought that was important is what their kind of seminal original story was that when they were recruiting my dad, they had both my parents over to dinner at the house of Charles Coriel and his wife, their eventual group leader. And somehow during the course of the evening, he told them about the atomic bomb and told them that his group was working on plutonium. And that was pretty unusual, especially for people as junior as my dad, and also the fact that my mom was there too. So during the whole war, where most people in Oak Ridge, other than the more advanced scientists, didn't know what they were working on, my parents did know. Of course, a lot of the people in that chemistry group also knew, but most of the wives knew nothing. So, that must have been really difficult, especially for my mother, but I never asked her about that, sadly. So I had to try to figure out what it might have been like. And when I looked online, I found a whole book of interviews with Charles Coriel, and they had been edited and published by his daughter, Julie Coriel, who has become a dear friend of mine. So neither of us can figure out why he spilled the beans that night, but now I know so much more about what my dad did in Oak Ridge. I had no idea. I thought he worked with a physics group.
Aha. All right. So it was pretty basic. It was basic knowledge to the other scientists, to your father, to your mother as well. But
Yeah.
you had no idea that this is what they were
Well,
working on.
I wasn't born until 1952, so
Well,
I
there you
wasn't there.
go. Right. There you go. Okay. I, how long did when did you learn about what had happened? At what point in your life did you find out, wow, this is what my parents were working on, back in the day?
I don't remember when I first learned about it because I think it was not a secret topic at all in our family. But
Oh,
I do remember when I was 10 was the year of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And of course, that was when all the kids were being shown the Bert the Turtle duck and cover movies. If an atomic bomb falls, duck under your desk and cover your head. Yeah,
yeah,
right.
because that's
That'll
going to save
really
you.
help. And everybody was building bomb shelters, and there were pamphlets with bomb shelter designs. And we did live in a suburb and had a yard, and I remember asking my dad, why aren't we building a bomb shelter? And he said, honey, it wouldn't help. And I was devastated. And I remember sitting in our rec room in our basement and watching the Kennedy Cuban Missile Crisis speech on TV and how scared we all were. By that
Wow.
time, my sister was away at college, but I was there with my parents. And I also remember another thing that was kind of a crucial memory for me was that when I was 17, they finally declassified some of the Japanese films of the horrible injuries that people had at Hiroshima and
Oh,
Nagasaki. And it was about a 17-minute, pretty gruesome film. And they showed it on PBS. And I sat with my dad and watched it. And I remember turning to him afterwards and saying, Dad, how do you feel about having worked on that now? And he said, you have to realize that we all thought the Nazis were working towards getting the atomic bomb, and we had to get it first. And that was our big motivation. We weren't
yeah.
even thinking about the Japanese until, of course, by the time the bomb was ready, Germany had surrendered. And then my dad was one of 67 people at Oak Ridge who signed a petition to Truman asking him to demonstrate the bomb first without dropping it on human beings. And Truman never saw that petition. So I doubt it would have made a difference either. But
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's amazing to hear these stories now, and you've unpacked a ton. So let me back up just a little bit. There are a lot of young writers that I deal with, that come on our show and that I talk to every day in groups and things like that. From what I understand, folks who are millennials or Gen Zers, they may not even know what the Manhattan Project refers to. So, just very quickly, you want to give us a quick little, elevator pitch on, hey, this is what the Manhattan Project is for folks who don't really know it yet?
sure. And I think the movie Oppenheimer really helped a lot with that.
For sure.
But the Manhattan Project was basically a project that went in 3 years from having the first fission reaction that was staged at the University of Chicago in a room under the deserted football stadium during the beginning of the war. And by the end of the war, they had created two types of atomic bombs. And most of that research and a huge industrial production happened in three places: in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, in Los Alamos, where the physicists were and were designing the bomb, and in Hanford, Washington, where they were producing plutonium for the plutonium version of the bomb. There was a uranium and a plutonium bomb, and both were used. The uranium bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, and the plutonium bomb was tested first at Los Alamos and then dropped on Nagasaki,
Yeah. Okay.
probably unnecessarily. Well, they were both probably unnecessary.
Hindsight is 2020, right? When we look back on
Right.
those things. So, but no, I think it's fascinating that you're writing a book about this. Now, it's a fiction book that's based on that. So you used parts of that reality and you built a fiction story around it. How'd you go about doing that? Where'd you start?
Well, my parents' stories, a lot of them were about daily life, like finding a copperhead on the porch of their house and having to call the MPs to come and shoot it, or that the guards at Oak Ridge had a horse, and one of them wanted to shoot a rabbit for dinner and his horse shied and he shot his horse in the head. And so he killed his horse, and then they had to dispose of the horse, and they thought maybe if they burned it, the army wouldn't find out since the army owned the horses, and they started a brush fire, things like that. Also, my dad had an accidental radiation exposure, and my mom told about the Southern women she met, one of whom asked her, "But I thought all Jews had dark hair and eyes, and you're blonde and you have hazel eyes. Your husband looks like a Jew, but how did you get to look like that? And where are your horns?"
Wow.
so,
I mean,
so
wow.
there were a lot of culture clashes, although I think my mother ended up making a lot of friends. And one of the fictional parts of the book is my mother befriends a Southern debutante named Betty after she asks my mother where her horns are, and they get through that and become really good friends and confide in each other despite their background differences.
Wow.
The other part of the story that's totally fictional in terms of what actually happened, but not fictional in terms of its basis, is it. I got inspired to write the novel partly when around 2019 there started being news reports that there were two Soviet atomic spies in Oak Ridge who were never discovered. And unlike the Rosenbergs or Klaus Fuchs, they managed to escape back to the Soviet Union after the war. And in fact, one of them, George Koval, got a posthumous medal from Putin, although they did not treat him very well when he came back to the Soviet Union. And a whole book has been written about him that I would really recommend. It's called Sleeper Agent, and the author is a very distinguished nonfiction author, Anne Hagedorn. So the spy in my book was very loosely modeled on George Koval. And in the book, Doris, the young wife in the couple, is a pianist, and she gives George Koval, not George Koval, Dave Sokol, the spy, piano lessons, and an attraction grows between them until she realizes that he may not be exactly what he seems. So,
Wow. So just in one book, you're dealing with some historical based fiction. You're dealing with a an espionage type of story because you're dealing with spies and the passing of information. And then you're also putting in there a romantic interest and a love story within this
mhm.
entire thing. Now that had to be interesting to, cross all those genres and pull all that stuff together. Did you give any thought to that, or did you just say, you know what, this is what I'm writing? Boom.
I didn't think so much about crossing genres because it's all historical fiction
Mhm.
and it's kind of women's fiction, I wouldn't call it really squarely romance fiction, even though there is romance in it. But it's really more about the relationship between Doris and her husband Rob, and her having grown up a little bit too fast, and then having fear of missing out because she married so young and got pregnant and has a difficult child to deal with. So, and there's female friendship in there. So there's a bunch of themes, and there's the ethical theme too, as Rob and Doris kind of discuss their differing views about the bomb and what should happen to it. And some of their friends,
Yeah.
also discuss it with them, certainly after the news comes out of what happened in Oak Ridge. So,
When I was reading through your bio and I was, checking out the book, it was amazing to me. That part of it was fascinating. The idea, the perception, the emotion that people, I think, dealt with back then, when this was the first ever mass type of, weapon of mass destruction. Um, it just is so different from how people are so desensitized to everything now. Um, how did you address that at all? How did you handle that in the book? Are there emotions based on how it used to be or on how it is today?
well, I think I did. I certainly addressed how it was then. I mean, I couldn't fully address the contrast with now.
Hmm.
But for one thing, people had no idea how powerful the bomb was going to be. They thought it was going to be powerful, but even the scientists had very different estimates of how many tons of TNT were going to be the equivalent of that first test at Trinity. So, that's one thing. Another thing that people, I think, don't think about so much is World War II was, well, it really started with Guernica during the Spanish Civil War, but the first time that there was mass bombing of civilians, I mean, we creamed Tokyo. We killed more people in Tokyo with Curtis LeMay's firebombing than we did with the atomic bomb. And Dresden and the firestorm. So Doris and Rob do discuss that and talk about, their feelings about why is this war being, fought on and killing civilians.
Sure.
And I think now we're too desensitized. I think people talk about a winnable nuclear war, and I don't believe there is such a thing. I wrote an essay in my Substack, and I said, where would you want to be if a nuclear war started? And I said, personally, at ground zero. I don't want to live through it. I would like to be vaporized instantaneously because there's going to be such horrible suffering and it's going to be the end of civilization.
Right.
And even if a few people manage to survive in some very altered world. So and when they do scenarios for nuclear war and war games, people talk about, well, it might just be a limited nuclear war. There would be one or two nukes. But, a lot of those scenarios just end up escalating very quickly. And the timeline is so short to having mass destruction that would alter Earth's climate and radiate millions of people. It just is really, and the bombs that were used during World War II were very small compared to what we've got now, and with hydrogen bombs
Hmm.
and hypersonic missiles and all those things. So,
Definitely has changed. So, I'm curious, and I don't want you to give away the secret sauce of the book ever at any turn in this. So you can always feel free to say, yeah, well, maybe I'll pass on that question. But the
okay.
the emotional part of it is fascinating to me. Like I said, um, did you, the folks who were dealing with this back then, were they a little more self-conscious about it because it was new, and did they have more of a sanctity for life, or was it more of a this is what has to be done? It's either us or them. Everybody's racing for this. I can't think about the ramifications right now. I just have to do my job.
Well, I think there was both. There is a story that is at Los Alamos after the Trinity test when everybody was rejoicing, although I think the movie exaggerated that a little. There was only one of the physicists who went out behind a bush and threw up, you know, and but on the other hand, I think there was more of that attitude of we've got to do it until the bomb was actually a reality. And then when they tested it and realized how huge it was and what the potential was, that's when the recriminations and the ethical questions and everything started in earnest among most of the scientists that worked on the Manhattan Project. But there were people like Edward Teller, who some people say was a model for the movie Doctor Strange Love, who was a very, very enthusiastic advocate of the hydrogen bomb, and other people like him. And I think that was one of the fundamental conflicts in Oppenheimer, was that Oppenheimer more was on the side of realizing that we now have the power to ruin the earth. So
Right. Right. So let's talk about the characters that are in the book. You've based several of them on real life people, and so it sounds like your mother, for instance, it sounds like is in the book. Okay, and
yeah,
then
Rob
okay.
and Doris are both based pretty closely on my parents' lives and on my guesses about what my parents were like when they were young, having not known them until, much later in their lives.
Hmm.
And that's one of the reasons I wanted to write the book. I, my mother and I were very close when I was a child, and as I got older, she went through some fairly depressed years, and I kind of pulled away from her. And after she died, I felt like, gee, I didn't give her a lot of mercy, like a lot of teenage girls and young women don't for their mothers. And writing this book, I wanted to go back to, the mother that my dad kind of described to me about when she was young, and what I just imagined it must have been like for her to be in that incredible situation.
Wow, was that therapeutic at all to feel like you were sort of connecting with the mother that you didn't know?
Yeah, I think it was helpful for me.
That's interesting. I haven't heard that kind of an angle on characters before. That's very interesting. Did you insert yourself into the book? I mean, obviously you couldn't put yourself in as you, but did you insert yourself into the book in any way, shape, or form?
Well, some people say that every character in your book is a part of yourself. That's kind of a Jungian way of looking at it,
Sure.
I think. But I think the other two novels I've worked on have probably a lot more of me in their main characters than this one, because this one I was thinking so much about my mother. Although, my mother and I certainly have a lot of things in common, but she, I had all the privileges and freedom that she worked so hard for me to have, that she didn't have as a young girl in the 1940s. So,
Sure. A lot of times when we're writing a book, I know when I'm writing, I'm literally telling a story to somebody. I'm writing a story for somebody. There's that action going on with me when I'm writing. I've heard that a lot of other people have that too. Is that something that you experienced? And if so, who were you writing this book for or to?
well, I mean, one person probably, I have a son who's 33. I was a geriatric mother, so I was almost 40 when he was born.
Wow, good for
He
you.
still hasn't read the book, and I'm really mad at him
Oh, wow.
because I really wanted him to read it, and I'm sure he will eventually. Either that or he's read it and doesn't like it and doesn't want to tell me. I'm not sure which. And it's funny because his best friend is an economist, but also a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, and he's published two novels in the last couple of years. And I know he's read Sampson's novels, and I don't think
I
he's
see.
read mine. So Oren, my son, if you're ever listening to this, I have my eye on you.
All right. Well, we'll out him on social media. We'll go find him and go, hey,
No,
read
no,
your mom's
don't
book.
do that. He also has a different last name. That's why I feel free to say that.
Gotcha. So, were you trying to send a message to him, or was it for you, some sort of healing process?
Well, I
Uh,
think it was
fun.
partly to honor my parents. Julie Coriel and I have talked a lot about that, how her nonfiction book and my fiction book were attempts to really, you know, give life to our parents' stories and accomplishments. At the end of his life, my dad lived to be 87, and he gave a lot of talks to like senior citizen groups and stuff about his time on the Manhattan Project, even though he had a whole career after that as an electronics and systems engineer. But it was something that was really important to him, and I think, that reflects in it being important to me too.
Interesting. Now, let me ask you some questions about the publishing of the book, because on your earlier self-help books, you went traditional publisher. Now, on this book, the decision that you made was to go with whom again?
With She Writes Press, which is one of the first hybrid presses and publishes only books by women writers, although they had a sister or a brother publisher, Spark Press, that published books by men.
Gotcha.
But I did try to query agents, and you know how difficult it is. Everybody says, oh, you should don't stop before you query 100 agents. And I think I queried about 25 and didn't get any requests or any feedback at all other than sorry, not for me. And I, I lost patience with that process. And somebody told me about hybrid presses. I honestly didn't know much about them at all. And so I kind of submitted the book on a lark. And when they took it, then I started doing my research. And it turned out that Brooke Warner, who is the publisher of She Writes Press, is good friends with a couple of people who were my writing mentors in California. So they said, oh, well, if Brooke wants your book and you can afford to do it, go ahead. That's a great way to publish. So I went ahead.
Beautiful. All right. Well, I mean, congratulations. I'm glad that it's working out for you. Now we have, right now there's traditional publishing, and even within that, sort of vertical, there are so many different options in terms of
Yes,
how the
all
deals,
presses.
yeah, how the deals come out. Um, Self-publishing is, I don't want to say it's simple, but it is more of, hey, if you're self-publishing, you're self-publishing. You're pretty much on your own, and you gotta hire other people to help you out with little tasks, sort of an a la carte deal. The hybrid publishers sort of come in all shapes and sizes. I'm finding out, as I talk to more and more people. What was it about this hybrid publisher that made you say, hey, this is the one for me, and here's why?
Well, to be truthful, I didn't do a lot of shopping the book around for hybrid presses. I think the thing that attracted me to She Writes was their reputation, because there are some hybrid presses that are one step away from vanity presses. They will basically take anybody's book. They might demand some editing, but if you pay them, they will publish it. And She Writes is selective. I don't know how many they turn down, but they're also very expensive. So if you look at their authors, they're mostly women similar to me, older women who've had other careers so they can afford to invest some money in the publishing process.
Mhm.
And they do beautiful book covers. Like you can see my book cover behind me, and I
Oh
think
yeah,
I love it. And they will, refer you to copy editors. They don't do much in the way of publicity for your book. They'll give you tips on how to find publicists, and they prefer that you do. I actually went a different route and took a book marketing course that it was called 12 Weeks to Book Launch Success by Lainey Cameron, who is a published author herself, and
Mhm.
and I found it tremendously helpful. So, I felt that it was a better investment for me than the huge, huge fees that the publicists charge. Most of the ones that She Writes recommend start at maybe $13,000 and go up to 30, and I've seen authors pay more than that. And they may get you some good publicity, but they won't get you a return on investment in sales. And I felt like I'm not independently wealthy, and I don't have that much money to invest in my book, no matter how much I like it. So
I
that was a choice that a lot of She Writes authors don't make. They do hire publicists. So
gotcha. Now, when you made the move from nonfiction to fiction, I'm sure that you had an idea in your head of, hey, this is how this is going to look. This is how the process is going to feel. This is where we're going to end up, because you had kind of been through it before. But then you're dealing with how things are today as opposed to back when you were doing it, and you're going from nonfiction to fiction. So what was the biggest surprise for you when you came back and went down this path again in a different way that maybe was different than what you thought?
Maybe the biggest surprise was the figure that I've read that only one in 6,000 authors manages to get an agent when they query.
Well, that's just depressing.
Yes. Another big surprise that I've just learned gradually during this last couple of years as I've gone through the process is that even book publicists can only do so much these days because of the decline of traditional media, and the things that used to sell books don't sell them anymore.
Mhm.
So the need to be on social media and to develop an author profile and website and a Substack and do all that stuff, that was a big surprise to me because honestly, I probably could have done a lot more to sell my nonfiction books, and nobody told me what to do.
Mhm.
So, I did have something of a platform given that I was an academic psychologist at prestigious institutions, but I didn't do a lot, that I probably could have done to market those books.
Gotcha. And marketing is something I hear about a lot because even with the traditional publishers, half the time you end up doing all your own marketing anyway. And it's kind of like, well, then
Right.
what are you taking a percentage for if I'm doing all this work? But no, you really like the hybrid idea, and yeah, the book is coming out. It's coming out on January 27th of 2026. Is there a particular reason that you chose that date, or is that what the publisher said, hey, this is when we can have it?
That was the publisher's choice. I was really kind of hoping that it could be published in August because last year,
Hmm.
because August was the 80th anniversary of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki
Oh,
bombings.
yeah.
But they said that even though I might be ready, they wouldn't be ready by that point. And I did end up getting some nice publicity, linked to that anniversary, even though the book wasn't out yet. So it might not move book sales as much as it would have if the book was available, but I did the best I could with it,
Absolutely. So the promotion falls solely on you for this project, it sounds like.
pretty
So
much.
what are you doing now, and what do you have planned for promotion of the book between now and when it launches?
Well, I've been doing a fair number of podcasts. I've entered book contests, and Fission just won the historical fiction category of the American Writing Awards, and it's shortlisted for the Chanticleer Hemingway Award, which is for 20th century wartime fiction, and it's entered in a couple of other contests that haven't gotten to that point yet. So that's something I've done. I have a pretty active Substack called Nuclear Fiction that's a kind of behind the book Substack, and also talking about, projects I'm working on now and things like that. I'm now, when I was practicing psychologist, I stayed off of social media because I did not want, to have my opinions and things that might affect patients out there in public. So now I'm on, Facebook and Instagram, and we just had a presentation about how to use Pinterest. So I put up a few pins. So all those kinds of things. And I gave a talk. During my writing of the book, I met an Oak Ridge historian, D. Ray Smith, who's the Oak Ridge city historian, and he was kind enough to read two drafts of the book to make sure it was accurate, and then help me arrange to go in October to Oak Ridge and give a talk for the Oak Ridge Historical and Preservation Society, which was a lot of fun. And my friend Julie Coriel participated in that too. So we called it Two Fission Daughters because Fission Daughters is a name for the isotopes of radioactive substances. So
Okay, didn't know that either. All right, I'm just learning stuff hand over fist today. I'm trying to keep up. I love the amount of knowledge that went into this book. So um, the as you wrote this book out and you look back on it and you say, okay, here's where it came from. Here's the finished product. What is it you're most proud of, or what is it you're happiest about with this book? What's that thing that you hold up there that goes, man? I'm really happy about this when it comes to this book?
I think the thing I'm proudest about is that people are enjoying reading it. I got a great blurb from an author I really admire, Jenny Fields, who wrote a traditionally published book called Atomic Love. That's my favorite Manhattan Project novel, and there are about 20 of them, at least. I've tried to read most of them. I approached her not knowing her at all, and she had finally had time to read the book and gave me a great blurb and said she loved it. That was a great moment for me. And just people now that people are starting to read advanced copies and stuff, most of my feedback has been really good, and that makes me feel great because I had a lot of confidence in myself as a nonfiction writer, but when it came to writing fiction, I wasn't sure if I had the chops or not. So,
I love that expression. So, since we're talking about the chops of getting it done, um, everybody has kind of a process. They have a writing style. They have a way that some people are like, hey, every day at this hour, I'm going to force myself to write. Some people say, hey, whenever I feel something come to me, I'm going to put it in notes. And then every week I'll put all the notes together. What was your process for writing this book? And was it different than writing the nonfiction for you?
I think a big difference with the nonfiction is I usually had deadlines to worry about. And I also wrote about 35 book chapters and well over 100 journal articles. So I did a lot of nonfiction writing, not just the
Uh,
books. I think I've allowed myself to be a lot more relaxed in this process. I don't worry if I don't write one day and I don't have a specific writing time. But because I'm retired and don't have kids or grandkids around, I have a lot of time that I can devote to book marketing and writing. And so I kind of write when it pleases me. And I'm still a fairly fast writer. And I do a lot of drafts. And I often do partial drafts where I get to a certain point and I go back and say, oh, hey, wait a minute. I don't think I did such a great job on this. So I'm going to go back to the beginning and revise everything and then go from there. So I'm not, people talk about whether you're a plotter or a pantser, and I'm somewhere in between. I have an idea of the outline of the book, but I don't have every scene planned out in advance. And I do find that my characters kind of talk to me. Right? I love writing dialogue, and when my characters are writing dialogue, I feel like it's coming from them rather than from me sometimes when it's going well.
Perfect. That's perfect. No, that's the type of scenario that works. That's the type of thing that really gets it out there. I appreciate you sharing that with everybody. As we kind of bring this together and sort of wrap our time up, um, how can people reach you? First of all, I want to make sure we get that out there so that they are you doing a, pre-launch or a pre-sale or a pre-register or anything like that, or are they following you until they find out that the book's coming out?
Well, people can reach me on my author website, which is just leslieschoverauthor.com, or they can see the behind the book stories and some of my other thoughts and writings on my Substack, which is called Nuclear Fiction. Um, and I'm not, I still, it's a little late. This is something I've fallen down on a little bit, but right now I don't have the book up on NetGalley or for a Goodreads giveaway, but that's right in my sights right now. I have to start organizing that stuff. And I'm planning on just doing an online launch party, mainly for, friends and family and other writers. I don't think it's going to contribute a lot to book sales, but it's more like a celebration of the book launch. So I'm not, I don't have a book tour planned because I think, the number one, it's difficult to get bookstores to pay attention to you when you're an indie author, even if she writes author, that if you don't have a publicist who has a list of bookstores, I've found that even with our local bookstores, they're mostly blowing me off kind of thing. So, I'm looking around for bookstores or book festivals or things that might be worth the travel expense, but I also am just trying to be careful that I don't just, spend $10,000 traveling around the country and do book signings where two people show up. That's not going to be effective. So
Right. Okay. So that's not part of the promotional plan.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Gotcha. All right, Leslie, I am fascinated by the topic. I can't wait to, have the book come out. Let me just kind of ask you one last question here as we, sort of wrap this up for today. You've been a published author many times over at this point. You've published you are publishing your first fictional novel. Congratulations on all of that, because those are huge
Thank you.
accomplishments. But it takes quite a bit to get there. And there are a ton of people who listen to this show right now that are wanting to become published authors. And that's why they're tuning into folks like you, because they want to find out, hey, how did she do it? How did he do it? And they're trying to kind of find their own path. What's your best piece of advice for the authors that are out there that just are not where you are yet?
Well, the first thing is get those words on paper and try not to get paralyzed by your fear that it won't be good enough. And find a community of other writers. That's been really important for me. I'm a member of the Women Fiction Writers Association, and they have a historical fiction interest group that meets weekly, and I've become one of the volunteers to run those online meetings and met just a ton of really wonderful women authors that way. And she writes also, one of the very nice things about that publisher is they encourage their authors to communicate with each other. They have Facebook groups and office hours, and I just attended the Kauai Writers Conference. Um, so there are a lot of ways to get, you know, craft advice and feedback from other writers that's helpful. And then I think the other thing about publishing now is there's so many, it's much easier to publish your work than it used to be, because you used to really have traditional publishing or a vanity press and that was it. And now we have all these other pathways, more small publishers and hybrid publishers, and this whole industry that's grown up around self-publishing. And so there are a huge number of books being published now, and that makes it harder to get your book recognized among all those books out there. But it also means that if you want to publish your book, there's nothing stopping you other
Yeah,
than a small amount of money if you're going to self-publish.
for sure. Great advice. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that, and for just sharing everything that's going into this wonderful book. I can't wait to hear more about it. I think it's going to be a big hit for you. And man, I'm really looking forward to seeing this climb the charts. With your hybrid publisher and everything you're doing.
Don't hold your breath,
So,
Rory.
oh, come on. If we can't believe in each other, then what are we doing? Right?
Well, I'm trying to have accurate expectations. I love my book, but
This
I
this is
don't
going
think
to
it's
be
going to be
awesome.
any bestseller.
I think you're going to be surprised how many Gen Xers, are going to respond to what the storyline is. But I hope I'm right. Let me know if I am, will you? Send me a message.
I hope so. And she writes, did get me an audiobook deal, which I really appreciate. So
Oh, there you go. Are you going to be narrating it yourself?
no, I have a benign tremor, and as I've
Hmm.
aged, my voice has a little tremor in it. I would never try to narrate my own book. I don't know if people
Yeah.
notice it on this podcast, but I can hear it.
I wasn't hearing it at all. So no, you slid it past me. Must be that awesome mic you have.
Maybe the
All
one that
right.
creates all the echoes.
All right. So the author of Fission, a novel of atomic heartbreak, it's coming out on January 27th of 2026. Leslie Schover. Leslie, thank you so much for joining us today, for talking about your book, and for giving such great advice. You've been an absolute delight, and I loved having you on the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Folks, this has been another just awesome episode of the Right Path podcast, where the truth still counts and where words still have power. Folks, this is the place where authors know that every page is a step forward. So let's lift each other up, let's dust ourselves off, and let's all move forward together.